Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Umacorn and Wade and Cornell, Mikkel. Great to see all of you, and Andres. Awesome. Again, let me know where you're tuning in from. If you're new to Adobe XD, let me know that as well. As a reminder, these masterclasses go a little bit deeper than some of our daily challenges. Hey, Laura, great to see you as well. But I'm going to try my best to go through some of the basics so that you can follow along as well. Mwenda, great to see you. Alrighty, so masterclass number 84 is upon us. I'm going to go ahead and hop over to my screen. If you do follow me on Twitter, you may have seen me post a preview of this. This is what we're going to be designing today. It's a landing page. This one in particular is for makeup or cosmetics or whatever it might be, but you can use something like this for pretty much anything these days. It's a very simple landing page with some copy, some images, possibly some video. We'll see where we go with this page, some icons, buttons, components, all sorts of fun stuff. Stroofy, that's a great name. Great to see you. Arsham and Sandro, Dima. Sweet. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get going. We're gonna hop over to Adobe XD and we're gonna start a new document. So like I mentioned, this is a landing page. So typically for the web, you can also use this for the iPad as well. A mobile experience will be a little bit different, but we're gonna go ahead and start nice and large with a 1920 by 1080 pixel artboard. I'm gonna zoom in here and I'm just gonna name my artboard landing page just to keep things nice and organized. All right, so the first thing we're going to do with the artboard selected is change the background color. Now, this one, we can go in either directions. We can go light, we can go dark, but I think to allow the images and the makeup and the copy to really stand out, you might want to go a little bit darker. Now, for this particular design, I'm thinking we're not going to go pure black. We might want to bring a little bit of color into this. So I'm going to pivot over to the blues, and you can kind of see that in here on the color picker, and then just bump it up a touch, somewhere maybe right about here, right? So it's still in that range of a very dark landing page, but it just has a touch of blue in there, which is kind of nice. It adds this nice, elegant feel. Hey, Gareth, great to see you as well. Sweet. If anyone has questions for XD, design, whatever it might be, definitely throw them in the chat. I will be taking a quick peek. Sandro is saying, my first live and my first contact with XD. That's a great place to start. We also have the daily creative challenges, which run Monday to Friday, which are also fantastic. You can also go back and re-watch some of the older ones. You have sample files to get started. It's a great time. Also have some tutorials on YouTube as well. Alrighty. So we've got our dark landing page. We may tweak this at some point, but we'll see how things go. I'm also going to start dragging out some guides. Now, to help organize and align elements on these pages, we can use a variety of methods. You know, over here to the right-hand side with an artboard selected, we can enable a layout grid, we can enable a square grid, whatever works best for you and your designers, or you can just drag out a guide. So I'll just pop one somewhere about here. I'm also going to pop one on the same side on the right. All right, Mohammed has a question. I'm a UX designer, but want to make a portfolio. How you come up with the ideas behind these designs? That's a big, very good question. You know, a lot of times, you know, many of the designs that I create are, you know, things that I personally love. So whether it's gaming or if I quickly go over to Dribbble, maybe, if I can spell properly. So looking at very quickly some of the designs I've created, you know, space. I'm a big space nerd, so I created this landing page on the James Webb Telescope. Something like this robot. This probably wouldn't fall into your world, but you know, I like robots and sci-fi stuff. You know, gaming over here. So a lot of these things come from stuff that I like to do on a daily basis or that I'm interested in, which really does help because it allows you to look for opportunities in the industry that maybe need some work on the user experience side, and then kind of create a case study of those things. Now, I don't typically create very in-depth case studies, although I do have one on Behance that I uploaded not too long ago. I know we're striving off topic a little bit, but I think this is important. You know, I have this one here. It's logging in, I think. So I have this one over here, which we created on one of our master classes. It might have been split into a few master classes, but this one was created from an actual application. It's called Bestla, and it's an application to control your Tesla. And I downloaded this, I used it for a little bit, but I really felt that it was a great application, but it needed a little bit of work on the user experience and user interface side. So what I did was I just started to create a case study, and I started exploring what a refresh interface could look like. And, you know, I went through and talked about some of the challenges and where it could be improved. And I think something like that really helps. You know, just, you know, grab something you're interested in and kind of go from there. And maybe even something you're not interested in, because it might allow you to, you know, have a fresh perspective on whatever that subject is, like knitting, for example. Maybe you're not into knitting. Create an application on knitting and look at it from the perspective of someone who has never knitted before. If you open up this application, what do you expect to see? You know, look at existing applications on knitting. Do you understand it as a new user? If not, you know, maybe there's some opportunities there. All right. Are they toy faces with bodies? It kind of looks like it. They're not official toy faces, but they do kind of look like that. I believe I grabbed those assets from Adobe Stock. All right. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit, Mohammed. But if anyone else in the chat does have suggestions for Mohammed or anyone else looking to create some case studies or, you know, a portfolio, definitely throw them in there. Alrighty, so we have our guides set up on this artboard, and we're going to start off fairly basic at the top with a navigation bar. And I'm thinking we're going to create a very simple logo. And this fake cosmetic brand is called Boop Cosmetics because, of course, it is. If you watch my streams, you know there's lots of I've lost the shortcut. Woo! There's lots of boops, right? So we're going to keep it simple and do just, you know, a type-based logo. So we'll put a B, and then we'll probably put a C as well for the cosmetics. And in terms of the typeface for this logo, I found this typeface on Adobe Fonts. It's called Brodeker. And what's kind of neat about this is, you know, here, let me change the color to white. It looks like a simple B, right? But there's all these different variations in here. So there's, you know, regular 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you increase this number, it becomes a little bit more elegant, which is really interesting, right? So you can do some fun stuff with this typeface. So if I do something like light 3, and then I duplicate this over, we'll do a C. And maybe for this one, we'll change it up a little bit. Maybe we'll reduce the size of the bit on the left, and we'll do light 2. So of course, you know, you can do maybe hairline, which is also very interesting. Now the thing with hairline is when I'm zoomed in like this, it looks okay. But if I were to preview this, that line on the C becomes a lot more difficult to see. No pun intended, right? So if I'm going to switch back to something like light, I would even consider maybe even regular so it thickens up just a little bit. But I think if I go back to light, I think that could work, right? So I'm going to just intersect this a little bit just to give it a bit of style. You know, these makeup and cosmetic brands are very elegant and they have a lot of style to them. It almost looks like, what's that? Was it Chanel that kind of has this intersecting kind of look? Obviously it's not, but you know, kind of fun. All right, that could do. Now, over to the right-hand side, we may want a few icons. Now, this service would probably have something like search to search all the different makeup brands and whatever it might be, maybe a cart icon and possibly a profile if there is that functionality. So if I go ahead and hop over to Nucleo, which I'll remind you all, it's a third-party icon manager, and I'll type out something like search I swear, when I'm doing these live streams, I just miss letters. That's better. I'm like, why is there no icon for search? That doesn't make sense. Because I misspelled it. That's why. So I'm going to copy this icon, pop it in here, and I think for the size, it's a little bit too small. So I might want to bump it up. Maybe the height will be something like 24, maybe. Something like that. And I can dive in here. A lot of these icons are border based, so I can dive in here and maybe increase the size of the border, reposition it on the inside. Maybe I'll bump this up to about 2. It's a little bit too thin, I think. Let's try 3. That could work. Now I think this guy here is a little bit too thin as well. Now it might be too thick. No, I think that could do. It's really interesting when you're designing, I talk about this all the time, when you're designing so zoomed in and focused on one particular object, it's really difficult to get a grasp of what it looks like. Here it looks a little, some of the elements look a bit too thick, some of them look too thin, but when you preview it, looks all right. I think it could work. So Sandra is asking, those icons are a plugin or part of Adobe XD? So these ones in particular are from, I have them stored in Nucleo, which is a third-party icon manager. Many of them I did purchase or license from various websites. Now, if you don't have icons of your own, what I would suggest is hopping down to the plugins panel here at the bottom, and then hitting the plus button at the top, or if you don't have any plugins, there's a nice big blue button. You can start browsing plugins. And there's one in particular that I talk about all the time. It's called Icons for Design, completely free, and it gives you access to thousands upon thousands of open source icons. So I can search for something like search, right? And you have all these different magnify glasses that you can use in your projects. So I can just, click on one of them. Let's see, from Feather is always a good icon library. And all of these are, there we go. They're all, vector based. So you can change the color, you can access the path and all that fun stuff. So again, if you don't have icons of your own, definitely grab the Icons for Design plugin. Someone's asking about an NFT related app in upcoming masterclasses. So I have, I believe, done crypto related application designs previously, but I definitely want to do another NFT related mobile application. So that will be coming at some point in the future, but maybe next month, possibly. We'll try for that. All right, so we have our search icon looking very fancy and snazzy. And the next one is, let's look for something like maybe a bag or a cart or shopping or something to that. Ooh, this one's kind of fancy. So this one here reminds me a lot of shopping, or obviously shopping, but more of like a fashion brand. So I'm going to copy this one and pop it in here. Let's change the color to white. Now this one's made up of border and fill based elements. So sometimes you have to change them twice, or you can always outline the stroke and then you'll only have to deal with fills, which is nice. Now this one looks like a little bit, I think, 3. I'm gonna move these little guys down a touch. Maybe I'll move this one up a little bit. There we go. All right, now one more thing that we might want in terms of an icon like this is, often you're on these e-commerce websites and you add something to your cart and there's a little bit of a badge that lets you know that, hey, you've got one thing in your cart or 2 things or whatever it might be, right? So what I want to do is in here, I'm going to grab my ellipse. Cornell says, remove the dots. That's a good idea. We may not even need these dots. Oop, there we go. And then I'm going to, now at the moment, we haven't really defined a primary color. So for now, I'll just use this nice purplish blue. Maybe I'll add a border of the background behind it. And we'll do something like this. I don't love this design. It's not terrible, but I might tweak it at some point. That could work. And then ideally on the inside, there would be a number, again, 1, 2, 3, that sort of thing. But for now, I will leave it at this. And then finally, we might want over to the right, maybe a user icon. That one's not too bad. It's a problem when you start collecting so many different icon sets, is you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling forever, and then you get to the bottom and you realize I don't like any of them. But I'm gonna copy this one and pop this in here. That could do. Let's bump up the size like the other ones to about 24. All right. And I think also, using guides in these situations also help as well. So if I just bring a guide out, maybe I'll line it up with the search icon down at the bottom there. Because you have to remember, when you're dealing with border-based icons, depending on where the border is positioned, this one in particular is positioned on the center of the icon, so it will mess with the size a little bit. So if I pop it on the outside, all of a sudden it's a very different icon. So you have a little bit of flexibility in that respect, right? Still a little bit strange looking. There we go. That's a bit better. I don't love that icon. Maybe it's just a bit too thick, possibly. Okay, those will work. Now, obviously, they're very squished together because we were designing a little bit zoomed in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 3 of these icons, which are all in different groups, and I'm going to place them into a larger group, Command and Control G, and I'll call this, I'll just call it Actions. But what's nice is over to the right-hand side with this group created, we can now go ahead and turn on a stack. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the direction that all of these icons are laid out, in this case horizontally, because they're going left to right or right to left or whatever. And it's going to define that stack for me. So it defined it as a horizontal stack. Now, because the icons were not spaced out perfectly, it's kind of a, the spacing is different. But I can dive in here and do, let's say 24, and it's going to automatically add 24 pixels in between each of these. I can also dive in here, hold down Shift, and adjust the spacing all at once. So let's say about 40, right? And that doesn't look too bad. Now I want to make sure that it lines up with the logo and the guide on the right. All right, that could do. Now, another benefit of stacks is if I decided at some point in the future that maybe the search icon should go all the way over to the right. All I have to do is grab this icon and move it on over, right? I can very easily rearrange these if I need to. All right. We're going to leave the icons for now. We may make some tweaks at some point in the future, but I want to get to some of the bigger elements down below. And what we're going to have here is we're going to have some, very large header copy, maybe description and some buttons. And then over to the right, we're going to have some visuals to really catch people's eyes. So in terms of the header copy, I'm going to click and drag to define the width, and we'll type out something like the perfect glowing skin. Now, this typeface is pulling from the last typeface that we used, which is the Brodeker. I'm gonna actually group this and call this logo, which I think, it's a nice typeface, but I think for this header, it's probably not going to do. So we're gonna switch it over to something like Lust, which is a serif typeface. It has some really nice elements to it, especially when you have something like the F up here. But where it gets really interesting is if I go ahead and switch this over to maybe display italic. Now we have some even fancier elements, right? So this really looks quite nice. And I'm gonna bump this up to somewhere around 100. It's very large, might be a bit too big, but we will see how things play out. That looks pretty good. And then down below, we want a description of what exactly this product is. Now, obviously this is way too big, right? So I'm gonna drop this down to about maybe about 24. We'll try there. And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about last week and probably every single masterclass, is when you're working with display typefaces like we did up here with this header, they look okay in this situation because they're nice and large. It allows you to see all these fine elements. But when you drop the size of that typeface, it becomes very difficult to read, right? Very difficult. Now, of course, we could space the characters out a little bit, but it's still a bit tricky. So I'm going to switch this over to something like Superior Title, which is still, you know, a nice, elegant looking typeface, but it's not as, you know, doesn't have all these different elements that the display typeface at the top had. So I'm gonna keep it at that. Maybe I'll space out the characters just a little bit. And then I'm actually going to copy some copy that I have on my other document and just paste it in here just so we're not wasting too much time. And then I might want to just bring some of this in a little bit. It's looking a little bit squishy, so I'm going to space out the lines to about maybe 48. And I'm actually going to adjust this a touch. There we go. I think that could work. All right, so I'm gonna leave it right about there. And then right down below, what I want to do is add some buttons for some call to actions. There might be two buttons, a primary button and a secondary. One that might be to maybe shop this particular collection, and then another one to maybe explore additional products. So Martin is asking, are serif or sans serif better for display fonts, or is it just subjective? A lot of it is subjective. It really comes down to what you are designing for. In this case, I went with a serif typeface because they're a little bit more elegant in some situations, and when we're dealing with makeup or cosmetics, or I guess makeup is part of cosmetics, but when you're dealing with anything like that, you know, something like an elegant serif typeface works really well. But if we were doing something like, you know, a crypto application, I know we were talking about that earlier, serif typefaces might be a little bit more difficult because they might not really match the theme of that subject, right? So really, a lot of it is subjective. All right, now down here we want our button. So I'm going to drag out a rectangle. Now, I'm not too concerned about the size of this particular rectangle at the moment, and you'll see why in a second. But the color, we're going to go for, let's see, something like in this range here. And we're going to be using this color throughout this landing page. So we'll definitely be able to you know, make some changes to this globally later if we have to. And to help us do that, if we hop into our document assets, we can add this color just like that. And we can also go through and add our character styles as well, just to make sure that we're keeping things nice and organized. Now, in here, we're going to want our first call to action. So something like shop collection. And I'm still liking the Superior Title typeface for this, but since this is a primary call to action, I might want to bump up the weight to maybe black, and then the white color on this background, this beige background, it's a little bit difficult to read. So I'm actually going to sample the background color, so we have a nice amount of contrast in there. And that looks decent. Now, I was saying earlier that I wasn't too concerned about the size of the rectangle. And that's because we're going to be using padding again. We can also use stacks in a button, but we're going to be using padding. So I'm going to group this button. And over to the right, we're going to turn on padding, which is right below stacks. And what this is going to do, it's going to look at the layer at the very back, which is going to be your background layer. And it could be a layer, a Boolean object, a group, a component, whatever it might be. Then it's going to look at everything above it. And it's going to automatically determine how much spacing is around. So you can get really creative if you have a padded group with maybe a very complex background, as long as it's inside of a group or Boolean object. So what we're going to do is, let's take a quick peek. I think it's a little bit too squishy, possibly. So what I might want to do is just increase the size a touch. And then probably on the sides, maybe let's try 24. Oops. I did the wrong one, didn't I? Way to go, Howard. Way to go. That's a bit better. Someone's asking about the 8-pixel grid. A lot of developers and designers love and live by the 8-pixel grid. Like many things in the design and development world, it really comes down to what you and your developers settle on. There's a lot of benefits to the 8-pixel grid. You know, many devices like our phones and our tablets and sometimes even our screens, 8 pixels, it multiplies and divides perfectly, so, which is one of the reasons why they go by the 8-pixel grid. But again, talk to your developers. Some people just are fine with 10 pixels. Some people like 7 pixels. Those people should reevaluate everything. All right, so we have our first button, right? Now, like I mentioned, we may want additional buttons. We may want another one over to the right-hand side, which is very similar, but a little bit of a different style. Now, to help us do that, we may want to start exploring and setting up our components. So with this button selected, over to the right-hand side, I can create a new component in the Properties Inspector. I can also create one back in my Document Assets or the Command or Control-K shortcut. There we go. So we have our first button created, and our default state is pretty much where we like it because we've already done that job at designing it. So what we're going to do now is back within the Properties Inspector, we can now create our second state. We can also create hover states, which we might get to at some point later down the line, but we're going to create a new state, and this will be just called either secondary or outlined or whatever it might be. And then from here, we can dive in and start making changes. Now this one, because it's an outline button, it's going to be very simple. I'm going to remove the fill. I'm going to add a border. Maybe I'll bump it up in size a little bit to about 2, and then change the color of the text to white as well to match that border. So we have our default state, we have our secondary state, and now what we can do is duplicate another one out. Let's try about 32 pixels. And we'll switch over to our secondary state, and we can dive in here and make changes. Maybe we'll just type out explore more, right? Now, what's really nice about these components, although I think the border is a little bit too thin possibly, but we'll keep it for now. What's nice about working with components and instances and states and all this fun stuff is they all remain linked. So if I wanted to go back and make changes to the styling of this particular button, I can dive in here to the main component. And if you don't know where your main component is, you can right click on any instance and press edit main component, right? And this took me to the secondary state because that's the one that I was on. But if you want to make changes to all of your states, switch over to your default state in the main component, dive in and make changes, right? So I can change the border radius maybe to about 8 possibly if I wanted to. So it definitely gives it a little bit of a different style. Now in this case, I kind of liked it at 0. So we're going to keep it at that for now. All right. I'm going to move this down a touch, maybe about 40. Perfect. Okay, so we have our header, we have our description, we have our buttons down at the bottom. I think I'm going to probably tweak the color of this at some point. And we're also going to use this color down here. Now for now, we're going to leave it just as a rectangle at the bottom. I'm going to sample this color. Ideally, there would be more information at the bottom of this landing page that we'll be able to scroll down. We're probably not going to get around to that today. We'll see. So I'll just keep it here as sort of a break. And if I want to edit both these colors at once, I can right click and press edit inside of my document assets, and maybe I'll just brighten it up a little bit. There we go. All right, perfect. Now, the next thing I might want to add is over to the right, we might want to add some visuals. We might want, a person that maybe is wearing the makeup or whatever it might be, and then maybe a picture of the makeup, maybe some arrows to navigate to different pictures or videos. So I'm going to grab my rectangle, and there's lots of different ways we can add in an image, right? We can just create a very simple square rectangle like this and pop some images in there. Or if we want to get a little bit fancy, we can do something like this. We can maybe round out the corners of this particular rectangle, but at the bottom, we might want to keep them fairly straight. So I can hold down, there's two ways to do this. I can hold down my Alt Option key and drag back these corners like this. So it only affects the individual corners that we're dragging. Or inside of the Properties Inspector, you can adjust the corner radius values right over here. So we have our shape. Maybe I'll just drag this down a little bit. Maybe I'll thicken it up a touch. Oops. There we go. So we have a shape. Now, inside of the shape, we might want an image or even a video. Let's start with an image. I'm going to hop over to Finder or Explorer on Windows, and I have some fashion-esque looking images here, and I can just grab one of them and boop, pop it into place. Now, like anything in XD, when you have an image masked inside of a shape, it doesn't have to be a rectangle. It could be a custom shape. It could be a polygon, an ellipse. You can just double click in here and then move it around if you want to. And there we go. I'm going to move this behind our text. Perfect. I want to make sure also to move it, make sure this rectangle is at the top, or actually behind that as well. And now we have our image. So all of a sudden, we're bringing life to this landing page just by adding in some images in there. Perfect. Okay. Now, one more thing I might want to do to add a little bit of style to this particular landing page is I might want to add a bit of a pattern. And of course, you could go over to something like Adobe Stock, right? And look up something like pattern or shapes or whatever it might be, right? And there's a free section in Adobe Stock that you can look up. There's 73,000 patterns that you can download. And all of these you can use in your personal and commercial projects, which is wonderful. Of course, there's a premium section as well with a lot more, over 200 million apparently. But you can also create one of our own. Now, this is kind of fun. I posted this on Twitter a few days ago. Yesterday? 2 days ago? Something like that. And we can actually use a repeat grid to create a fun looking pattern. So if I grab, let's say, the rectangle tool, I'm going to draw a nice large rectangle. And in terms of the size, maybe we'll keep it around 6. You can also use the line tool to do something similar. And I have my one rectangle in place. I can go ahead and create a repeat grid right here at the top. Boop. And then drag out a bunch more. I can hover in between. Maybe we'll do about 10 in between each one. Now, obviously at this point, it's just a bunch of, rectangles kind of flowing down. But what we're able to do now is grab something like our ellipse. I'm going to draw out a circle. I'm holding down Shift to constrain it. And then we can use this ellipse as a mask. So if I have this ellipse selected, I'm also going to select the repeat grid in the background, and then I want to create an object mask. So under the object menu, mask with shape, or Command and Control Shift and M, and it's going to take the repeat grid that we created and place it inside of that ellipse. And now I can maybe rotate it a little bit to give it a bit of style. Position it over here. I can either keep it on top or place it behind. And then maybe I'll just select a color. I can either use this color down here or maybe make it look a little bit more golden, something like that. And what's really nice is because we're using a repeat grid for these particular elements, I can dive into this repeat grid. Maybe I wanted these a little bit thinner. I can very easily do that, and it's going to update all of them, which is amazing, right? All right, someone says I have a component, or sorry, I have a question. Could be about a component though. when I made a hover component, the invisible content can still be triggered as the hotspot area when the cursor hovers in the invisible area. Will this feature be updated? So I believe so. There are two ways to answer this question, if I'm understanding it correctly. The invisible depends on how you made it invisible. If you took the opacity of that element and brought the opacity down to 0, then technically it'll still allow you to use it to trigger something. So it's still there, but it's not there. If you hide the object in the layers panel using the little eye, then that object should be completely disabled. So it should not be possible to use to trigger a hover state, if that makes sense. Now, another thing you can do is, let me actually show you over here, actually. So right here, we have our component, right? And if I go ahead and create a hover state, and maybe I'll just make some very quick changes to this. Maybe I'll change it to more of a gold, right? And I hover, everything works beautifully, right? But maybe we don't want the background of this particular object to trigger the hover state. In this case, we probably actually would, but hypothetically, let's say we don't. What you can do is you can go into prototype mode, and you'll notice that the hover state is you use the entire component to trigger it. But you can actually delete this existing hover state and select maybe an individual object like the text layer. You can click on the handle and then set up hover state manually. We can do a simple transition, going to our hover state, and we'll do no animation, right? So now, the exact same thing, but if I hover over the container, it will not work because we manually chose the text layer, right? So hopefully that makes sense. But if you do decide to, if you do need more flexibility for your hover states, you can definitely go into prototype mode and manually wire one up instead. All right, back over here. So we have our lovely little pattern. Oops, there we go. We have our lovely little pattern. It's a little bit too small, but I think it could do. But because this is all non-destructive, I can very easily make changes. So I can make the ellipse a little bit bigger. And I can move my repeat grid. There we go. Boop, boop. Beautiful. All right. Looking good. So now down below here, we may want, like I mentioned earlier, maybe a preview of what the makeup actually looks like. So I'm going to grab my ellipse, and there's, again, a lot of different ways we can go about doing this. I'm going to draw another ellipse out right about here. And this is where we're going to place another image in. So if I hop over to Finder, I've got a few images here of makeup, and this one looks pretty fancy. Now, I know some people are going to be questioning, this doesn't really look like she's wearing, I don't see these colors on her makeup, right? I know. But I didn't find any interesting looking makeup images that had the exact same color. So let's just pretend that she's wearing this makeup. I could bring this into Photoshop and then use some neural filters, but that's another story. All right. Now I might want to sample the border or the background for the border. Maybe put it on the outside just to give a little bit of a fun cutout, something like that. And if I'm missing anyone's question, definitely throw them in the chat again. I am taking a peek from time to time, but I probably missed a few. And then down below here, we may want to indicate what this makeup is actually called. So we'll do something like boop. Maybe this is specific to the brushes. Maybe it's not the actual makeup itself, right? We'll do maybe boop brushes. And then we'll add a price. Maybe they're $14.99. All right, that could do. And maybe very similar to what I did over here, I might want to just change up the text a little bit. Oops. So this will be dropped down to medium, and we'll have brushes at black as well. All right. Maybe I'll add a bit of an inner shadow just to separate it from the background, just a touch. Maybe if I add a bit of yellow and gold, that could look a little bit better. Or maybe it won't, I don't know. That's the fun of designing. Some things will work, some things will just not work. All right, that is looking decent. And then one other thing I might want to add is right down at the bottom, maybe there'll be some sort of navigation so you can actually transition to various products that might be showcased on the homepage. So we're going to start by creating our first arrow, and this is going to be the active arrow. So I'll create a rectangle like this. Maybe I'll sample this color down here. And then just to make my life a little bit easier, I will look up arrow, paste one in here. Maybe I'll sample the background color, makes it a little bit larger, thicken it up a touch. Maybe, yeah, that could work. All right, and then this one, I'm gonna group arrow. This can be right, and we're gonna also want one to the left. So I could very easily just grab this arrow and then over within the properties inspector, just flip it over. Now, maybe this one is the first one in the set, and possibly depending on how your carousels are set up, maybe there's no way to go back, right, from the first one. Now, ideally, you'd be able to cycle through. So if you clicked on this one, it would go to the last one, but let's just assume that's not the case. Might want to just drop the opacity just so we have this inactive state. You can also use components like we did earlier with the buttons as well. All right, that could work. So we have 45. Let's go to 40 and then 40 as well, just to keep things nice and aligned. I would probably, these text layers are probably a little bit too large, so I might want to just drop them down a touch. All right, I think that could work. So that's looking pretty good. So we have our header, we have our description, we have some buttons, some navigation over here to the right, which we should also create as a component so we can actually navigate this area. And speaking of navigating, we can also navigate to maybe a video. So here's what we're going to do. Let's actually create this component now. I'm going to select all this information. And the reason I'm selecting all this information is so that all of it can be included in the component. So what I want to happen is when a user clicks on this arrow over here to the right, a few things will change. The name of the product and the price will change. The actual image of the product, which is this one here, and then the preview image to the left-hand side will change as well. And possibly this little guy here, this pattern. Might want to change that just because, right? Now, if you don't need that to change, you may not have to include that in the component, but we're going to do that. So I'm going to press the plus button to create that component. And we've already gone ahead and designed out the default state. So we're going to, oh, everyone's saying happy belated birthday. Oh, so it was, when was my birthday? Monday, I think? I don't know, the 15th. I lose track. As I get older, birthdays are just like, I don't care anymore. They're fun, but actually it's a lot of fun now because my daughter actually, she made this little card for me, which I thought was super cute. Very emotional when she gave it to me because she just turned 5, so she's now kind of really starting to understand what birthdays are and how special they are, especially for kids. So it was a lot of fun for her. Less fun for me because I'm getting older and I'm certainly starting to feel it, but fun times. Anyways, so we have our component ready to go. I'm going to press the plus button to create a new state, and I'll just call this product 2. You can see the creativity runs in the Pinsky genes. So actually the dinosaur at the top that one there, that one there. My wife drew that because my daughter's she's still trying to figure out drawing, and she's getting a lot better, but not there just yet. But I have a feeling my wife and I are both very artistic, so she probably will be, and she seems to like drawing and painting. So we'll see where that goes. All right, so we have our second state created, and now I'm going to dive in and start making changes. So this one we're going to bump up to 100% opacity because there will be a way to get back. We're going to change the image here. We'll pop this one in here. They're very similar, but we'll run with that. We'll change the name. I don't know what to call it. Maybe Boop. Maybe this will be Foundation, right? And then we'll change this to 2355. Why not, right? And then maybe we'll keep the pattern the same for now, but what I want to do is change this image here. And we're going to change it into an image for now, but in a second, we're actually going to go back and replace it with a video because I think that'd be kind of fun. So let's go ahead and find another image. That one's not bad. Let's see. That one's pretty striking. Let's try this one. Pop that in there. Move it to the side a little bit. And now we have our two images, right? So we have our default state and we have our second product. And what we want to do now before we start adding some video is we want to be able to transition between these two different states. So from prototype mode, what we're going to do is we're going to select the object that's going to trigger that transition. And in this case, it's going to be the arrow on the right-hand side. And I have that selected. I can go ahead and press the handle over to the right. And then I want to make sure that I have a tap trigger selected at the top. In this case, there's really nothing to animate, so we'll do a very simple transition to our second product, which is right here. And then we could, if we wanted to, add a little bit of a dissolve. So if we were to keep it at none, if I preview this, we can go ahead and click, and it's going to automatically transition. But possibly, depending on what you're looking for, a bit of a dissolve, maybe ease in and out. Let's try 0.4 seconds. Okay, that could work. It's a very simple dissolve. It just eases in, eases out, and it doesn't last too long. We could bump it up a little bit. Yeah, that might be a bit too long. So let's go back to 0.4. And then what we can do from the second state, we can actually go back to the first state by wiring up the arrow on the left. So I'm going to make sure to choose our default state. So now we can go to our second state and then back to our first, and everything dissolves really nicely. All right, so what I was talking about earlier is we may want to add in maybe a little bit of motion to this particular landing page. So either from the default state or the second state, whichever one you'd like, you can actually dive in here and replace this with an image, or with a video, sorry. Now, what you're gonna notice, I'm gonna do this on purpose, is I have an image selected, a standard image, right? If I were to go to this folder here with a bunch of videos and grab this video here and drag it in, you're gonna notice it's not letting me mask it into place. If it were, it would highlight in blue. So if I just drop this here, it's gonna kind of just pop it here. And that's because you can't replace an image with a video because they're two different types of masks. So in this case, if I do want to replace it, I would go ahead and just change this to a solid color to get rid of that already existing mask, right? And then I can go ahead and pop a video in just like this, right? Boop. And now I can dive in here and reposition this video. And then with that video selected, over within the properties inspector, we can choose how the video plays back. So in this case, instead of playing on tap, we want it to play automatically when the preview of this landing page loads. And then if you wanted to, you can also hop into this heads-up display and customize it even further. So at the top left-hand corner, we can add a thumbnail if we wanted to, which is great if you have it set to play on tap. In this case, it's playing automatically, so a thumbnail wouldn't make much sense. We can preview the video. we can play the video. If it does have audio, you can actually mute or unmute the video right here. And you can also trim the video, which is really cool. So if the video is too long or you want to start at a certain point, you can very easily do that here. And then finally, you can loop the video, which I'm definitely going to do. So when it gets to the end, it'll just start at the beginning. All right. So again, we have our default state, and now we have our second state, which contains a video. So now if I go ahead and launch the preview, I can go ahead and click, and the video will play after that dissolve, which is kind of fun, right? And I can go back, and there we go. All right. Hey, Rebecca, great to see you. And if anyone is joining a little bit late, you can always either scrub back to the beginning of this live stream and rewatch it, or once it's over, just refresh the page where this video lives, and you'll be able to watch it from the beginning. And maybe on the second one, I might want to just change the repeat grid. Maybe I'll just switch out the color a little bit. Maybe I'll make it a nice pinkish purple or purplish blue, something like that. Just to, there you go, right? Fancy. Now on this, there might also be a way to, maybe. I was going to say, there might also be a way to, purchase or, go to this collection, for example. But we also have to remember that over here to the left-hand side, we have a call to action to shop the collection or explore more. So you have to ask yourself as a designer, how many different call to actions do you want on a page, and do you want conflicting call to actions? In this case, possibly not. Ideally, this button here would allow you to shop the collection that, all of these would be part of that collection. So clicking on Shop Collection will take you to a page where you'll be able to see the Boop foundation and the Boop brushes as well, right? All right, before we wrap things up, I did mention earlier that we may want to add extra information down here at the bottom. And this is where you can start exploring scrolling. So if I just grab the bottom of this artboard, I can drag this down. And I'm also going to expand this. And this will reveal our viewport handle. So right over here to the left, we have our handle. And essentially anything above this handle is going to be visible when you initially preview your prototype. And then anything below will be visible upon scroll. So if I go ahead and play this, right, you can see what I'm talking about. Everything above is visible immediately, and then I can scroll down and I can see the rest. And this is where we can start adding in some additional content. So we can maybe grab a text layer, and this could be maybe where we have additional collections. So let's see. Maybe it's the Umacorn collection. I just saw Umacorn's name in there. So Umacorn just released her own line of something or other. I'll bump up the size, make sure it snaps nicely. Definitely don't want this white typeface, so maybe we'll sample this darker color here. Something like that. Now, one other thing you might want to consider, especially if you are designing a landing page with scrolling, is, let me move this down a little bit. When I launched this initially, we see this bar at the bottom. Nothing is telling me that there's content down there. Absolutely nothing. So I might not know as a user, especially if I don't have scroll bars, I might not know that there's something down there. So you may want either to, place your text layers just peeking up a little bit, or, add another image down here. Just to stagger it a little bit. Maybe I'll add a nice long one here. And then let's hop over here to our images, and we'll grab, I don't know, this one looks pretty fancy, very elegant. And then now here I can place our text layer to the right-hand side. So if I launch this preview, all of a sudden I have this little tiny object, it's just a sliver of it, but it's poking out from the bottom, which tells many users that there's something else down there. You should probably start scrolling, right? So again, there's a lot of ways to do, things like this, but that's a little bit of an option. I might want to move it up a little bit, right? And then ideally, you would have some additional text Down here, I would probably change up the styling a little bit, and then we can grab our buttons. Maybe we just need one button. Pop it down here, and because this is a component, we may definitely want to make some changes or have a light version or a dark version or whatever it might be. So if I go ahead and edit the main component very quickly, I'm going to create a new state. This will be the dark version, and I'll simply change the text color to white, and then the background to our background color at the top. So I can now hop down here and boop, there we go. So one more time, preview. We have our landing page that we created. We can cycle through the products, and we have some built-in video, which is wonderful. And then down here at the bottom, we have a little bit more content that we just added in the last few minutes with another image and another call to action using components. And that is going to wrap things up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and I will see you all next time.